Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Viking Flatbread. That's right, as promised, during our recent Viking stew video, I'm going to show you my new favorite way to make flatbread, which, believe it or not, is based on a recipe that's over 1,000 years old. And to get started, we will add some wheat flour to a bowl. And this would be more authentic if you used whole grain. But to honor 1,000 years of evolution, I'm going to use all-purpose for a little bit of a nicer texture. And then to that, we will add a couple very ancient grains, some spelt flour, which is a relative of wheat. And then last but not least, some rye flour, which probably would have been the most common flour used during the Viking times. And then what we'll do is add a nice big pinch of salt before we give our dry ingredients a quick mix with a spoon. And once that's been accomplished, we can pour in our liquid, which is usually water, but this time we're using buttermilk. Oh yeah, according to historians, the Vikings used something very close to modern buttermilk to make their breads. And what we'll do is start stirring slowly with our spoon, so as not to splash the milk out before this starts to come together. And we will keep stirring until we formed what we call in the business a shaggy dough. And you could go a little farther if you want, but once I get to this point, I like to clean off my primitive wooden spoon and switch to my even more primitive fingertips. And we will basically pinch, squeeze, and press this dough until it all comes together and all the flour's been incorporated and the sides of our primitive wooden bowl are clean. And once we do eventually get to this point, we will transfer it onto a work surface. And then using just enough flour to avoid sticking, we will knead this very briefly, or just like a minute or two is plenty, or until we formed a sort of smooth, somewhat elastic, relatively sticky dough. And in general, when we're making bread, we want to be careful not to work in too much flour, since that can result in a drier, tougher final product. Plus, by keeping our dough a little bit sticky at this point, we'll be able to use more flour when we roll it out, which is where I find the extra flour more useful. And that's it. Once we have a ball of dough formed, we will wrap it in plastic or cover it with some kind of animal skin, and we will let it rest on the counter for 15 minutes, and then attempt to portion this into 6 equal pieces, which I almost always do with a scale, even though I usually don't film it. But what you do is weigh the whole thing in grams, and then divide by 6, and then simply make each portion that weight. And since that one was way over, I had to cut some off, and then cut some more off. And we'll simply keep deleting or adding until we're at the exact weight we want. And every once in a while you'll get lucky, and you'll have the exact weight, which will be way more exciting than it should be. But anyway, the point is we'll divide our dough into 6 equal pieces, at which point we'll roll each one into a ball. And so they don't dry out, make sure you cover the ones you're not working with. And then to form each flatbread, we'll take one ball of dough and flatten it out. And then sprinkling on as much flour as we need, we will roll these out to at least 1/8 of an inch thick, or possibly even slightly thinner. And ideally, we end up with some kind of roundish shape. Although that is optional, and these will cook up and taste exactly the same, no matter what shape you end up with. And since we did keep our dough fairly sticky and moist, we are able to use a generous amount of flour here to prevent sticking. See, if we'd worked too much in earlier, we might be adding too much at this point. And with almost all breads, the less flour you use, the better. And that's it. Once we have our dough rolled out, we will head to the stove, where we preheated a dry cast iron pan over medium-high heat, and we'll place our flatbread in, and we'll cook that first side for about a minute. And after about 30 seconds or so, you're going to see little bubbles form. All right, it's not super easy to see at this point, so let me poke it with my finger. And once we see that, after about a minute, we'll go ahead and flip this over. And we'll give the other side about a minute as well. And just like when we made pita bread or Lebanese mountain bread, if you press down with your spatula, you will see the layers separate as steam fills the pocket between the 2 layers of dough. And if everything goes according to plan, parts of it will puff up, sometimes all of it, which I'm going to show you in a minute. But anyway, once we've cooked our flatbread in a hot dry pan for about 1 minute to 1.5 minutes per side, and we've achieved some of those signature char marks here and there, we'll remove that to a plate. Oh, and you don't have to, but I do like to cover this with a dry towel as I'm working through the other ones. All right, that's going to hold the moisture in and help us achieve a more supple texture. And that's it. We'll go ahead and cook the other 5. Oh, once the pan is nice and hot, you might be able to back the heat down a little bit towards medium. But as usual, those kind of adjustments will be up to you. And by the way, if you can grab one of the other warriors, or a shield maiden, to help you with this, it goes a lot faster, since while one person is rolling, the other person can be cooking, flipping, and stacking. And if you are able to do this with a couple friends, you really can make a lot of flatbread in a relatively short amount of time. So something to keep in mind if you're planning a big feast. And generally speaking, the first ones you do are going to be the worst ones you do. And as that pan gets a little hotter and that dough rests a little longer, sometimes you will achieve full puff, where the 2 layers fill with steam completely, and you end up with a gorgeous puffy flatbread like this. Oh yeah, once again, that is way more exciting than it should be. And that's it. Once we have all those cooked and stacked, I like to leave them under the towel for about 10 minutes or so, just to let them rest and continue to steam each other. And once the cooking and resting's done, we can move on to the eating. And for this one, I'm going to enjoy it like I think the Vikings would have most commonly enjoyed it, which would have been spread with butter and then drizzled with honey. And that, my friends, I promise, is going to be way more delicious than you ever expected. Or sure, the butter and honey help, but that buttermilk we used is giving this kind of a sourdough vibe. And that little bit of tanginess is absolutely perfect with those earthy grains. And I'm not sure why I folded, when I probably should have rolled it. So let me do that now. And yes, it does taste better rolled. I don't know why. Although now it's trying to unroll itself. Look at that. That is so Viking. But anyway, if you just enjoy this with butter and honey, you will be very happy. But of course, I had to try something a little more complex. So I decided to apply some fermented cream, which the Vikings were very fond of. Oh, and I know that looks like a random pattern, but it's not. That is the Viking runic symbol for brunch. And then after that, I applied some cured salmon, which is something I'm sure they would have paired with their fermented cream. And then to add a little bit of tartness and a touch of sweetness, I applied some half blueberries, which are supposed to simulate the bilberries that they would have used, which were smaller, and apparently sort of like blueberries. And then I also did a little bit of torn raspberry, which after placing over, sort of kind of looked like caviar. And that's it. I finished up with some fresh dill. And then because this was so beautiful to look at, I decided not to fold it or roll it, and I just bit right in. And that really was delicious, but also very strange. All right, all the flavors and textures definitely work together, but it was an unusual flavor profile and kind of unexpected. So it did take a few bites to appreciate what was going on. And there's really no way to know exactly if they would have served it like this. But then again, why wouldn't they? But if you don't want to take any chances, and you want to enjoy this bread exactly like they would have 1,000 years ago, just boil up a big pot of meat, vegetables, berries, and herbs, and enjoy it just like I did in the recent Viking stew video. But anyway, I don't think you're going to have any trouble coming up with ways to enjoy this. I mean, you are, after all, Eric the Red, of what to put on this delicious bread. But no matter how you enjoy it, this is a very easy and fun flatbread to make, and I really do hope you give this a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.